Have you ever wondered how a single man could bring down an entire network of American spies and get away with it for nearly a decade? This is not a spy thriller, this is a true story, and it happened inside the walls of the CIA. In this episode, we uncover the chilling tale of Aldrich Ames, a quiet, unimpressive intelligence officer who became one of the most devastating traitors in U.S. history. He sold the names of undercover agents to the Soviet Union. At least 10 of them were executed. Many others simply vanished. And yet, for years, he kept showing up to work like nothing happened. He passed lie detector tests. He bought a $540,000 house in cash. He drank expensive wine and drove a Jaguar. All while his colleagues searched for the mole who was sitting just a few desks away. This is the story of betrayal from within, of arrogance, greed, and the terrifying truth that sometimes the most dangerous enemy is the one wearing your uniform. Stay with us, because what you're about to hear is not just the story of Aldrich Ames, it's the story of how the United States nearly lost control of its most guarded secrets, and didn't even realize it. The Traitor Within, the Aldrich Ames story. Chapter 1. The Making of a Spy. In the shadow of Washington, D.C., where ambition walks hand in hand with loyalty, a boy named Aldrich Hazen Ames was born in 1941. His father, Carlton Ames, was a CIA analyst, a man of intellect, whiskey, and secrets. The younger Ames grew up steeped in the language of intelligence, surrounded by hushed conversations and half-answers. While other boys idolized athletes or movie stars, Ames watched his father vanish for long stretches on overseas postings, returning with cryptic souvenirs and tired eyes. The seed was planted early. The government didn't just work in offices, it operated in shadows. When Aldrich graduated high school, he followed in his father's footsteps with mechanical inevitability. There was no dramatic recruitment, no trench-coated agent at the end of a bar. In 1962, he simply began working at the CIA as a summer intern. It was the era of Cold War paranoia. The Bay of Pigs had recently failed. Berlin was a city split in two. And the CIA, reeling from public embarrassments, needed new blood. Ames, earnest and unremarkable, seemed like exactly that. He wasn't dazzling. He wasn't a star. His college record was spotty, his demeanor wooden. But he was dependable, and in the intelligence community, that often mattered more. In 1965, after a few years of menial labor in the agency, Ames was promoted to full-time officer status. He worked in the Soviet East European Division, a prestigious placement for someone so ordinary. But under the surface, there were cracks. Ames drank heavily. He was awkward in the field. His reports were late. But the CIA, blind to his faults or simply willing to overlook them, kept him in play. Chapter 2. Opportunity and Weakness. Through the 1970s and early 80s, Aldrich Ames bounced from one overseas post to another: Mexico City, Ankara, Rome. He collected contacts, wrote cables, and blended into a bureaucratic maze where mediocrity was easy to mask. His personal life, however, was far from stable. His first marriage collapsed. His finances were a wreck. He was drinking more heavily now, not socially, but in isolation, with the urgency of someone trying to blur the edges of his own life. It was in this vulnerable state that something irreversible happened. In 1985, the CIA sent Ames to the Soviet Division's counterintelligence office back in Langley, Virginia, a posting that gave him access to the names of nearly every U.S. asset working inside the USSR. And that's when he made the choice. It wasn't ideological. It wasn't patriotic. It was money. He walked into the Soviet embassy in Washington, D.C., unannounced, and offered his services to the KGB. He wasn't subtle. He wasn't cryptic. He simply sold out his country for $50,000 cash. And in doing so, he unleashed a wave of deaths and disappearances that would hollow out the CIA's Soviet network in a matter of months. Chapter 3. The Death List. The information Ames gave the Soviets was devastating. In a single act, he handed over the names of 10 key American assets, all undercover within the Soviet government or military. Some were generals, some were scientists, all were spies. Almost immediately, they began disappearing. Some were arrested and interrogated. Others were executed in silence. Some simply vanished, their fates never confirmed, their names scrubbed from existence by a system that erased its traitors. Inside CIA headquarters, alarm bells rang. How had so many assets been blown? Had there been a communications breach? A mole? But suspicion didn't immediately fall on Ames. He was considered a reliable, if somewhat dull, officer, and that worked to his advantage. While the agency scrambled to diagnose the leak, Ames lived luxuriously. He bought a $540,000 house in cash. He drove a brand-new Jaguar. He took lavish vacations with his second wife, Rosario, a Colombian national who encouraged his ambitions, and spent his spy income with careless glee. Co-workers were baffled. Everyone noticed. His official salary couldn't explain it. But Ames always had a story. A family inheritance, an investment windfall, a wealthy wife, and somehow, the story stuck. Chapter 4. Paranoia and Double Lives. Throughout the late 1980s, Ames continued feeding the Soviets information. He was paid in installments, some in cash, some deposited into numbered Swiss bank accounts. All told, the KGB paid him over $2 million, making him the most profitable Soviet mole in U.S. history at the time. What's more chilling is that he didn't even work that hard to cover his tracks. He used his own car to drive to the Soviet embassy. He made little effort to launder the money, and yet he remained untouched. Inside Langley, a paranoia began to spread. Someone had to be leaking. The CIA and FBI launched multiple internal reviews, mole hunts, and background checks, but Ames eluded them. Even when internal suspicion circled closer, he talked his way out. He took polygraphs and passed, thanks in part to tranquilizers he took beforehand to control his nerves, and so the damage continued. Every time a new asset was recruited inside the USSR, they'd be compromised within weeks. The CIA began to fear the Kremlin had cracked their encryption or surveillance systems. They looked everywhere, except inward. Chapter 5. Cracks in the Facade. By 1991, the Cold War had ended. The Soviet Union had collapsed. But Ames had not stopped. Even as the geopolitical chessboard changed, he kept offering what intelligence he could, mostly information on post-Soviet networks and U.S. counterintelligence methods. It was greed now, pure and simple. His expenses ballooned, his lifestyle grew more ostentatious. But the walls were closing in. A new joint task force between the FBI and CIA was created specifically to find the mole that had crippled U.S. operations in the USSR during the 80s. This time, they were more careful. They looked at banking records, they looked at real estate, and they looked at Ames. What they found didn't add up. His deposits were far beyond his salary. His spending couldn't be explained away. Finally, after years of being in the shadows, he emerged as the prime suspect. But rather than arrest him outright, the task force followed him for months. They monitored his calls. They tailed him on drives. They even searched his garbage, and the evidence piled up. He still had spy paraphernalia. He was still meeting with handlers. He was still active. The noose tightened, one surveillance report at a time. Chapter 6. The Arrest. On February 21, 1994, Aldrich Ames arrived at work as usual. By now, he had grown used to the stress. He had no idea how close they were, or maybe he did, and simply assumed he was untouchable. That morning, federal agents approached him in the parking lot and placed him under arrest. Simultaneously, agents raided his home and arrested his wife. Inside their house were mountains of evidence: cash, documents, coded notes, lists of names, everything. The illusion shattered. At trial, Ames pled guilty in exchange for a life sentence without parole. Rosario received a 5-year sentence. The courtroom was tense. There were no dramatic denials. Ames didn't rant. He didn't explain. He simply stared ahead as the enormity of his betrayal sank in. The damage he had done was incalculable. He had personally compromised at least 100 operations. He had caused the deaths of at least 10 U.S. assets. He had set American intelligence back a decade. And for what? A house, a car, a hollow sense of control? Chapter 7. Aftermath and Legacy. Today, Aldrich Ames sits in a federal prison in Indiana. He is 83 years old. He rarely speaks to the press. He has no remorse. The CIA, in the years since, has quietly rebuilt its networks. New protocols were created, background checks tightened, surveillance enhanced. But the scar remains. Ames wasn't a genius manipulator. He wasn't a master spy. He was a deeply flawed man with access and no loyalty. And that, perhaps, is what makes his story so disturbing. Because it wasn't ideology that led him to betray his country. It wasn't blackmail. It wasn't desperation. It was simply money, and the belief that he could get away with it. Final words. The name Aldrich Ames is now synonymous with betrayal. His story is a warning, not just about espionage, but about arrogance, about how systems built on secrecy are often weakest from within, and how one man, armed with nothing more than access and greed, can devastate the invisible machinery that protects a nation. Thanks for watching. If you liked this episode, subscribe to the channel, leave a like, and comment. See you in the new episode.